Good morning, K1 and K2. It's time for another read aloud. I have several books here that I'm going to read, and we'll just see how many we can fit into the time. Okay, let's begin. The first one, Ahoy There, Little Polar Bear, written and illustrated by Hans DeBeer. And this book is written for Selena. Lars, the little polar bear, lived with his mother and father near the North Pole, where everything was white for as far as the eye could see. Although he spent much of his time alone, he was happy. But one day, when Lars swam quite far from his den, something terrible happened. Lars caught his foot, was pulled down deep into the sea, then yanked up in a gigantic net. Lars was dropped to the ground with such a bang he fainted. When he awoke, he couldn't tell where he was. Above him was a ladder, so he climbed up the slippery rungs. Lars roamed the long hallways. It seemed he was all alone until something rustled behind him. As he turned around, two large eyes stared at him. Lars ran for his life. Just when he thought he was safe again, he heard a voice. "Don't be afraid. It's only me, Nemo, the ship's cat. Welcome aboard." Lars looked up. Above him was a friendly-looking creature with orange fur. Lars could see that Nemo was an animal he could trust. "I'm Lars," said the little polar bear. "I'm trying to get home as soon as I can." "I'm afraid that isn't possible, at least not right away," Nemo said. "Your home is a long way from where we are now." "Where are we?" asked Lars. "We're on a ship, on our way back to port. Once we're there, I'll take you to see some friends who may be able to help. But until then, there isn't anything we can do. Why don't we get something to eat? I expect you're very hungry." When he had eaten, Lars felt much more cheerful. He curled up beside Nemo and fell fast asleep. When they awoke, Nemo took Lars up to the deck. "Look," he said, pointing to the horizon, which was aglow with lights. "That's the port. We'll be there soon." Lars was so excited he could hardly wait to go ashore. When the ship had come into port, Lars eagerly followed Nemo onto the deck and over the plank. "Try to look inconspicuous," said Nemo. What Lars found on the other side of the plank surprised and disappointed him. Everything was so untidy and dirty. "I'm afraid this isn't a very clean place," sighed Nemo. "We'd best hurry. Follow me around the back way. The streets are much too dangerous." As Lars and Nemo made their way through alleys and back streets, Lars's white coat became dirtier and dirtier. He wished more than ever that he was home again, where everything was clean and white. Following Nemo over fences and along walls took all Lars's efforts. At last Nemo stopped. "We've arrived," he announced. "Wait here a moment." It was very dark. Many eyes were staring at Lars. He grew quite nervous. But the eyes belonged to some more cats who turned out to be just as friendly as Nemo. The cats looked grave as Nemo explained Lars's problem. They thought it over for a few minutes. Then a black and white cat stepped forward. "I'm Johnny, also a ship's cat," he said. "My ship is leaving for the Arctic tomorrow. We must get you on board before daylight." Lars, Johnny, and Nemo had to rush back through the alleys and backyards. Lars was so excited to be on his way home again, he forgot to watch where he was going and was almost hit by a truck. When Lars reached the ship, he said goodbye to Nemo quickly, for there was not much time. It was a sad moment. For Lars, the time on the ship passed quickly. It wasn't long before he spotted something wonderful on the horizon. "Look, Johnny!" he shouted. "The North Pole! See how clean and white it is? I was once as clean and white as that." That night, when the ship anchored, Lars thanked Johnny and set off for the beautiful white shores of the North Pole. As Lars swam, the sea washed his fur clean. Once on shore, Lars ran for his den to greet his worried parents, who couldn't have been happier to see him. When Lars told his parents about his adventures, their mouths dropped open. "And this is what Nemo looks like," Lars explained, as he tried his best to look like a cat. Although his parents were not sure they understood, they were so happy to have Lars home again, it didn't really matter. That night they all slept close together. After that day, Lars's father often found his son gazing out at the horizon. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "Ships," Lars said, "and cats too. Someday a cat might fall off a ship and come to visit us." The end. Our next book is also about traveling the world. It's The Snail and the Whale, written by Julia Donaldson and illustrated by Axel Scheffler. The Snail and the Whale. This is the tale of a tiny snail and a great big gray-blue humpback whale. This is a rock as black as soot, and this is a snail with an itchy foot. The sea snail slithered all over the rock, and gazed at the sea and the ships in the dock. And as she gazed, she sniffed and sighed. "The sea is deep, and the world is wide. How I long to sail," said the tiny snail. These are the other snails in the flock, who all stuck tight to the smooth black rock, and said to the snail with the itchy foot, "Be quiet, don't wiggle, sit still, stay put." But the tiny sea snail sniffed and sighed, then cried, "I've got it, I'll hitch a ride." This is the trail of the tiny snail, a silvery trail that looped and curled and said, "Ride wanted around the world." This is the whale who came one night when the tide was high and the stars were bright, a humpback whale immensely long, who sang to the snail a wonderful song of shimmering ice and coral caves and shooting stars and enormous waves. This is the tale of the humpback whale. He held it out of the starlit sea and said to the snail, "Come sail with me." This is the sea, so wild and free, that carried the whale and the snail on his tail to towering icebergs and far-off lands, with fiery mountains and golden sands. These are the waves that arched and crashed, that foamed and frolicked and sprayed and splashed the tiny snail on the tail of the whale. These are the caves beneath the waves, where colorful fish with leathery fins and sharks with hideous toothy grins swam past the whale and the snail on his tail. This is the sky, so vast and high, sometimes sunny and blue and warm, sometimes filled with a thunderstorm, with zigzag lightning flashing and frightening the tiny snail on the tail of the whale. And she gazed at the sky, the sea, the land, the waves and the caves and the golden sand. And she gazed and gazed, amazed by it all. And she said to the whale, "I feel so small." But then came the day the whale lost his way. These are the speedboats running a race, zigging and zooming all over the place, upsetting the whale with their ear-splitting roar, making him swim too close to the shore. This is the tide slipping away. And this is the whale lying beached in a bay. "Quick, off the sand, back to sea," cried the snail. "I can't move on land, I'm too big," moaned the whale. The snail felt helpless and terribly small. Then, "I've got it," she cried, and started to crawl. "I must not fail," said the tiny snail. This is the bell on the school in the bay, ringing the children in from their play. This is the teacher holding her chalk, telling the class, "Sit straight! Don't talk!" This is the board as black as soot, and this is the snail with the itchy foot. "A snail! A snail!" The teacher turns pale. "Look," say the children, "it's leaving a trail." This is the trail of the tiny snail, a silvery trail saying, "Save the whale!" These are the children running from school, fetching the firemen, digging a pool. squirting and spraying to keep the whale cool. This is the tide coming into the bay, and these are the villagers shouting, "Hooray!" as the whale and the snail travel safely away. Back to the dock and the flock on the rock, who said, "How time's flown," and "Haven't you grown?" And the whale and the snail told their wonderful tale of shimmering ice and coral caves and shooting stars and enormous waves, and of how the snail, so small and frail, with her looping, curling, silvery trail, saved the life of the humpback whale. Then the humpback whale held out his tail, and on crawled snail after snail after snail, and they sang to the sea as they all set sail on the tail of the gray-blue humpback whale.